Just a few days ago, the House and Senate Republicans, along with the governor, unveiled a budget that inadequately funded core functions of government. They did not fund common education to the levels that they desperately needed. They refused to fund public safety to the tune of $7 million for state troopers. And now what I believe is unprecedented, at least in the 7 years that I've served in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, the House Democratic Caucus today are unveiling our alternative budget to what the Republicans have offered here in the state House this past week. And while in a few minutes we'll have an opportunity to vote on their budget, we believe when you take a look at ours, which comes to the exact same bottom line as theirs, we have a balanced budget, but it's a balanced budget that adequately funds the core functions of government: education, higher ed, common ed. It adequately funds public safety, troopers, Department of Corrections. It takes care of veterans' needs. It takes care of those people who desperately need funding, and it does it all while staying within a balanced budget framework. So when the Republicans stand on the House floor here in just a few hours and say, well, we could do nothing else. There's nothing else we could do. We couldn't find the money for state troopers. We couldn't find the money for children. We couldn't find the money for higher ed. The reality is they're wrong because the money's there.
House Democrats have created, I believe, an inclusive budget that has been crafted with input from each one of these legislators who voice their district needs, which affect all Oklahomans. We have in our districts Oklahoma workers. We have teachers. We have correctional officers. We have highway patrol. We have public health providers. We have public employees, which is our government. Much has been asked of these public employees over the last 7 years. While their bills and their cost of living have continued to increase, we've told them year after year to tighten the belt, that there is no available funds. So many teachers have lost their jobs in the past 7 years because of the decreased funding for public education alone. We've cut it over $200 million. Education's at its lowest funding since 1992. Tuition at our universities have been forced up yearly because of continually decreased funding for our state universities. And many college students who are graduating now are looking to move out of state and to find jobs that pay enough to pay back their student loans. Our nation's economy is growing and improving and rebounding, and Oklahoma's is also. And we should remind lawmakers that correctional officers and state health care workers and teachers and those that are building our highways are Oklahomans with Oklahoma families. Cutting fat and losing weight has always been looked upon as being healthy, and we do need to cut the fat in government. But bulimia and anorexia is seen by those who suffer from it as looking good. But we know that it's very unhealthy, and regardless of the political popular cliches that sound good when we shrink government, we shouldn't force Oklahoma families into financial anorexia. Oklahoma's government is made up of Oklahoma's families. And after 8 years of government famine, many of these families now qualify for food stamps because the legislature is too busy trying to make them look good by refusing a fair and equitable wage for these essential core services. There's been many measures the last 8 years that make it increasingly difficult for the legislature to address these problems. Too aggressive tax cuts, too aggressiveness in added tax credits have shown to be problematic whenever we're trying to address these in the budget. These are core essential needs that affect all of Oklahomans, not just a select few. So we believe that this is a proposal that is very responsible, very comprehensive approach at balancing the budget while keeping Oklahoma's core functions at an operational level. With that, the things that are different in the spending of the Republican budget that was forwarded to us last Thursday and this one is that we're not expending any more available dollars than they are. We're keeping it the same amount of dollars. We're putting $7.3 million for the troopers to receive their pay raise, $12.2 million for DOC to increase theirs 5% from $11.83 an hour to $14 an hour, a livable wage, $22 million for state employees, a one-time bonus, $1,000 bonus, $154 million to Common Ed. That's $44 million more than what the Republican plan called for. In that, we're putting $36 million to assist with operating costs and also to offset, the $36 million was to offset the lost revenue from the passage of State Question 766, which is going to affect Common Ed. $53 million to higher ed. That's almost $20 million more on top of what was asked for. We're also putting $750,000 in the Department of Veterans Affairs for much-needed dilapidated equipment like X-ray machines that are digital that are costly, but there's no money in their budget for that.
We are increasing, and what I came to him with is a request that we must address something that was not addressed in the Republican budget, and that is the loss of revenue from State Question 766, which is various estimates, but a minimal estimate of $36 million. Also, we have documented that we have increased student enrollment by over 30,000 students since 2008-2009 era. We have not increased for that. Also, we have things coming at us from the federal government. We're lost through the sequester. There's multiple losses. At the very same time, we're expanding our demands on public education, as we've seen through testing and the extreme cost of testing. I'm on a county superintendent's meeting almost every Friday during session, and our superintendents are saying, don't hang us out to dry again. This is an opportunity. We've got an increase in revenue. Let's use it appropriately and fund education, because we are losing teachers. And what is happening when we're losing teachers, we're increasing class size, and therefore we'll say, well, how are we going to compensate for that when we have lost in the results of education? So that's why I'm proud of this budget, and I'm glad that we've actually looked at it rather than just glossing it over.
I represent 20,000 students that live in my district and the families that support them that are always being strapped with ever-increasing tuition and fee cost. If we pass the majority's budget, I can almost guarantee we're going to see another tuition and fee increase, resulting in increased fees to students and quite likely more borrowing for them, and which at some point means more paying them back. Our budget holds that harmless, and we cover the mandatory fees without raising taxes, without a fee increase anywhere else, using the exact same amount of dollars that the majority has in their budget. And I think it's a common sense approach to actually helping the burden that we keep placing on Oklahoma families, probably more so than the $87 they might receive from any proposed tax cut.
Everybody is saying that the Capitol is crumbling around us and the limestone is falling and that it's unsafe. But I want to tell you what is unsafe is whenever you have one correction official that is guarding 160 inmates. That is unsafe. Not only are we losing the number of guards at our state institutions, but more importantly, we're also losing the experience, the number of years of experience that is actually guarding this inmate. These inmates are really dropping. Our Oklahoma Highway Patrol is the 911 agency for the state of Oklahoma. Let there be no question about it. They come in and they do bomb searches, and the Oklahoma Highway Patrol has been at least twice in every county in the state of Oklahoma. Just 2 weeks ago, whenever we had our Oklahoma City Memorial, because it was after the Boston bombing and there was concern, the Oklahoma City Police Department asked the Oklahoma Highway Patrol if they would come in and give support. The Highway Patrol responded, and guess what? The Highway Patrol had more men on the ground here in Oklahoma City for that marathon than the Oklahoma City Police Department. And I want to tell you something. All we're asking for is a raise of $7.1 million. We can give $8 million to the film industry that goes back to Hollywood this year. And my only question is, which one of those two is a core function of state government?
Ladies and gentlemen, as a veteran, I'd like to remind people that we have Oklahomans in harm's way at this very moment. When our country calls, Oklahomans respond in record numbers and have historically. And so it's our responsibility to make sure when they come home, wounded or thank God not wounded, that we are able to take care of them. This year we pass up an opportunity to address the needs in our veteran centers with dollars. We're simply asking in this budget, our budget, $750,000 to address the needs of our veterans who have stood at the time of need. We do a lot of things for our veterans in this state, but if we miss an opportunity, if we miss a year without going back and providing for the needs of those veterans, it's hard to make it up the year following that. So I stand as a veteran, and I ask that we not only give words to what we feel about our veterans, but we follow that up with dollars.
What is mind-boggling to our caucus is that the state budget has grown by nearly $600 million in the last 2 years. We've seen growth revenue to the tune of nearly $600 million, but yet we couldn't find just a few $1,000,000 for troopers, corrections, state employees, teachers. The budget that was offered by Republicans this year, while it increases funding for common education by $74 million and then throws in an additional supplemental to take them to $91 million, in actuality, because of State Question 766, because of increased health care costs and mandatory costs, come this December, our schools, our superintendents, our children are looking at taking a negative cut to their budget, despite the fact of a $74 million increase. Our budget keeps them whole and actually allows them to move forward in reducing class sizes instead of reducing revenue.
This last item of redirect from the general revenue, $50 million here for repayment of oil and gas credit.
Yeah, and that last part there is subject to debate, I guess you could say. Right now, the oil and gas industry is set to receive $118 million in rebates. That comes off the top before we get to any other spending for kids or highways or state troopers. It simply comes right off the top. We're asking this year that we offer the oil and gas industry $68 million in terms of repayment, and then we can take $50 million of that money and put it towards funding education and public safety. The oil and gas industry is doing well. We realize we have an obligation to them, and that obligation should be met, but I would argue that we also have an obligation to our children, our veterans, our seniors, our state troopers, and that obligation should be met as well.
Would you pay it back later, or just ask them to forgive that?
No, it would be something we'd put it on a repayment plan that would just push it off a little further, just like they did with the income tax cut this year. Well, I know that currently there are a group of Republicans, from whether it's Tea Party Republicans or middle of the road conservative Republicans, who do not support the budget. And if they'll stand with us and defeat that budget today, then they can take our proposal and take many of these plans and implement them and get them passed. And that's our hope for today.
Have you given this to Representative Martin?
We've passed this budget. This budget is being distributed to all members of the legislature. Our caucus, much like they did, caucused about it about 10:30. We distributed that information to them after having taken their input, and then the House Republicans will have that before we go on the floor today.
How many people were involved in the creation of this?
Every member of our caucus, all 29 members.